United States just made a decision that could redefine the balance of power in the Pacific, and the Philippines is at the center of it. Late Tuesday night, the U.S. Congress approved the transfer of a decommissioned Ticonderoga-class warship, one of America's retired giants, straight to Manila. But this isn't just about a ship. It's about strategy, sovereignty, and survival. Why is the world's biggest navy suddenly empowering the Philippines with one of its most capable? And what does this reveal about the next stage of the U.S.-China rivalry? Stay with me because the stakes are massive. If you're interested in this topic, hit the like button, subscribe, and type "interested" in the comments, and I will give you a heart. When you hear the words U.S. Congress approves warship transfer, it sounds like another headline lost in the noise. But this one is different, because this single decision to hand over a decommissioned Ticonderoga-class cruiser to the Philippines carries the weight of decades of history, rivalry, and unspoken warning. This isn't just about metal and missiles. This is about message and meaning. The Ticonderoga-class cruiser is no ordinary vessel. It's a 9,800-ton floating fortress once among the most powerful surface combatants in the world. Designed during the Cold War to protect U.S. carrier strike groups from Soviet threats, it's equipped with the Aegis combat system, an integrated radar and missile network capable of tracking and engaging multiple threats simultaneously. For decades, this class of ship stood as the ultimate guardian of American naval supremacy. Now, imagine that same technology, or a version of it, sailing under the Philippine flag. That right there is where this story begins. Because for years, the Philippines has been viewed as the weakest link in the Pacific's security chain. Small navy, limited resources, constantly bullied in the West Philippine Sea. But with one stroke of a congressional pen, the dynamics shift. The Philippines is no longer just a strategic location, it's becoming a strategic partner, and the timing couldn't be more deliberate. Let's connect the dots. The U.S. has been watching China's growing assertiveness in the South China Sea. The artificial islands, the gray zone tactics, the harassment of Filipino fishermen, and the laser pointing incidents against Philippine vessels. Washington knows these aren't isolated acts. They're chess moves. Each reef turned into a military base. Each Coast Guard confrontation is part of a silent strategy. Expand influence, intimidate neighbors, and test America's commitment. So what does the U.S. do? It sends a signal wrapped in steel by transferring a Ticonderoga-class cruiser, a ship once reserved for defending aircraft carriers, to a developing ally that sits right on the front line of maritime tension. It's no coincidence that this happens now, in the middle of heightened talks over the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, EDDA, expansion, and just months after joint drills like Balakatan broke records in scale and complexity. The Philippines is not just hosting U.S. troops anymore, it's stepping into a new role as a co-architect of Indo-Pacific stability. But let's be clear, this isn't charity. This is strategy. America doesn't give away billion-dollar ships for free. The goal is layered deterrence, a network of capable allies that can hold their ground even when U.S. carriers are thousands of miles away. By arming the Philippines, the U.S. is fortifying its front line without stationing a permanent base. It's like upgrading your firewall instead of rebuilding your entire system. Now here's what makes this transfer even more symbolic. The likely ship in question is the USS Shiloh, decommissioned just recently. This isn't a museum piece. The Shiloh has seen combat duty, guarded nuclear carriers, and operated in the very waters now contested by China. Handing that to the Philippines sends a subtle but unmistakable message: we trust you with responsibility. This trust doesn't come easy. The U.S.-Philippine alliance, remember, has had its ups and downs. From the closure of Clark and Subic bases in 1992 to years of hesitation over joint patrols, the relationship has weathered both pride and pragmatism. But since 2014's EDCA and the recent revival of defense cooperation under President Marcos Jr., things have changed. Washington now views Manila not as a dependent ally, but as a decisive one. Because let's face it, geography doesn't lie. The Philippines sits at the crossroads of the South China Sea and the Pacific. Whoever controls these waters controls the flow of $3.4 trillion 0 cents in annual trade and has direct access to Taiwan's southern flank. You see, this cruiser isn't just about defending Philippine shores, it's about securing global supply routes, the arteries of world commerce. And the truth is, this move isn't only about ships. It's about showing the world that the Philippines can no longer be underestimated. It's about changing perception from a small island nation constantly reacting to a regional player finally acting. This transfer upgrades the Philippines from being a bystander to being a stakeholder. Before I go deeper, I want to know your take. Type defend in the comments if you believe the Philippines should continue strengthening its military capabilities to protect its sovereignty and people. Now let's talk about what this really means for the Filipino Navy itself. You see, for years, Philippine sailors trained on aging ships, World War II relics, hand-me-downs, and second-tier assets. They made do with what they had, patching up old vessels and stretching fuel budgets just to keep presence in contested waters. But this cruiser changes the tone completely. We're talking about advanced radar, vertical launch systems, and real-time threat tracking. This is a jump from analog to digital, from Coast Guard patrols to blue water operations. It's like going from a tricycle to a Tesla. Same mission, but now with precision, speed, and confidence. And yet, this new era comes with enormous responsibility. Operating a warship of this scale requires trained crews, logistics chains, and a long-term defense budget. The annual upkeep could reach $30 million, 0 cents or more. That's not small change for a developing economy. But with proper investment and international support, it could become a school of strategy, a symbol of how the Philippines evolves into a serious maritime power. This warship won't just patrol waters, it'll patrol identity. It says, we belong in this conversation. But in the next segment, we'll break down what this transfer truly costs politically, economically, and diplomatically. Because as the Philippines steps up its game, some powerful players aren't exactly cheering from the sideline. Here's where it gets complicated. Because every warship carries more than weapons. It carries politics. The transfer of this Ticonderoga-class cruiser isn't just about enhancing the Philippine Navy. It's about realigning the political chessboard of the Indo-Pacific. And while the US calls it partnership, not everyone sees it that way. Let's start with the obvious. China. Beijing isn't thrilled about this. In fact, within hours of the announcement, Chinese state media quietly called it a provocative move that destabilizes regional peace. Translation? We're not happy. But China's anger isn't just about the ship itself, it's about the symbolism. The Philippines, long seen as the weakest voice in the South China Sea dispute, is suddenly being armed. Not just diplomatically supported, but materially upgraded by the world's largest military power. And that changes everything. Beijing knows the implications. A Ticonderoga-class cruiser doesn't just defend, it observes, it tracks, it collects. With its Aegis combat system radar, it can detect and follow aircraft and missile launches hundreds of kilometers away. That means the Philippines could soon have eyes deep into contested airspace, and by extension, so could Washington. For China, that's a nightmare scenario. But for the Philippines, it's empowerment, something that's been missing for far too long. For decades, Filipino fishermen were chased out of their own waters, Coast Guard vessels were blocked, and arbitration rulings were ignored. This transfer says we're not alone anymore. Now let's look at how we got here politically. The Mutual Defense Treaty of 1951 has always been the backbone of the U.S.-Philippine alliance. But in recent years, it's been revived in a way few expected. After a decade of diplomatic uncertainty, from the independent foreign policy approach under former President Duterte to the rapid restoration of ties under President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., Washington and Manila are back in sync. The timing isn't random. The Indo-Pacific is now the center of global power struggle. As the US pivots from the Middle East, it's doubling down on Asia, building alliances with Japan, South Korea, Australia, and now reinvesting in the Philippines. It's called integrated deterrence, a strategy designed not to provoke war, but to prevent it through strength and coordination. The warship transfer fits neatly into that playbook. And yet, here's the irony. This move that strengthens the Philippines' defense might also make it a target. The more capable Manila becomes, the more it risks becoming a pressure point between the US and China. History reminds us that small nations standing between giants often get squeezed hardest. Still, this isn't 1942 anymore. The Philippines today isn't helpless. It's cautious but not naive. Accepting the cruiser isn't blind loyalty, it's calculated survival. Because neutrality only works if no one wants what's yours. The Philippines learned that the hard way. Now let's talk about the domestic side, the politics at home. This transfer will ignite debates within Manila's own walls. Some will argue it's a necessary investment for sovereignty. Others will call it dependence disguised as diplomacy. And both have a point. After all, operating such a ship isn't cheap. Beyond training and fuel, the modernization of ports, the construction of maintenance facilities, and the creation of local defense industries are all part of the deal. It's a long-term commitment, not a gift, but a challenge. But here's what makes this truly transformative. This warship could do for national morale what decades of speeches couldn't. For once, the Filipino Navy won't just be guarding borders. It'll be projecting presence. Imagine that cruiser anchored off Subic Bay. Sleek, powerful, bearing the Philippine flag. It's not just a ship, it's a statement. We are no longer defenseless. Before I continue, I want you to drop the word pride in the comments if you believe the Philippines deserves to stand tall in its own waters, not as a pawn, but as a power. Now let's look beyond the Philippines. This move doesn't exist in isolation. Other Southeast Asian nations, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, are watching closely. Some might see it as an escalation, others as inspiration. For years, the region has relied on diplomacy and restraint to manage tensions. But as China builds bases, stations bombers, and installs missile systems on artificial islands, restraint starts looking more like vulnerability. The U.S. knows this, and that's why it's acting now. It's using the Philippines as proof that smaller allies can play bigger roles. It's a strategic ripple effect, one that could redefine alliances across Asia. But let's be honest, this partnership comes with strings. The Philippines will be expected to step up. More joint patrols, more training, more intelligence sharing, and that means deeper involvement in US-led security operations. For better or worse, Manila is now part of the big league, and that comes with both privilege and pressure. Critics might say this is America reasserting influence, using military aid to secure compliance. But look at it differently. Perhaps it's a recognition that the Philippines finally matters enough to invest in again. For decades, it was overlooked, under-equipped, and underestimated. This cruiser changes that narrative. Yet for every strategic game, there's a diplomatic cost. China won't stay silent. Expect increased patrols near the West Philippine Sea, more gray zone tactics, lasers, shadowing, water cannoning. The Philippines must now match deterrence with diplomacy. This is where leadership truly gets tested, where patriotism must meet prudence. Because, let's be real, military strength without restraint is just provocation. The true victory is not in firing missiles, but in ensuring you never have to. And that's what this transfer is really about. It's not preparing for war, it's preparing for peace through strength. It's about saying, we're ready just in case. But readiness has a price, and in segment 3, we'll explore exactly what that cost is, financially, geopolitically, and emotionally. Because behind every ship that sails into history, there's a bill that someone has to pay. And this time, it's not just about money, it's about trust, responsibility, and the question that no one dares to ask. Can the Philippines truly handle the power it's been given? Every decision of power comes with a bill, and the Philippines is about to see just how steep that bill can be. Because receiving a U.S. warship isn't a win written in stone, it's a contract, one written in politics, economics, and responsibility. And if mishandled, it could either elevate the Philippines into the ranks of respected maritime powers, or drown it in obligations it's not ready to bear. Let's start with the simplest but most painful truth. This ship isn't free. While Congress may authorize the transfer under the U.S. Excess Defense Articles (ODAC) program, the real costs lie beneath the surface. Training, refitting, maintenance, and long-term logistics. The Philippines will have to spend millions to upgrade its naval facilities to house and service a ship of this size. According to defense experts, even a retired Ticonderoga class cruiser demands an annual upkeep of at least $25.00, $30 million excluding fuel and manpower. For a developing country where classrooms still leak during monsoon season, that's a heavy trade-off. But that's the paradox of sovereignty, isn't it? Independence requires investment. If you want to stand tall, you've got to pay for your boots. Now, beyond money, let's talk about manpower. This ship requires a crew of nearly 330 sailors. That's 330 men and women who will need months, even years of specialized training to operate radar systems, maintain engines, and handle guided missile launchers. The Philippines has some of the best seafarers in the world, yes, but running a warship of this scale is a whole new ocean. The Philippine Navy will have to adapt fast, maybe even send dozens to the U.S. for technical training under the Foreign Military Sales FMS framework. And that's where the long-term benefit kicks in, because while the cost is high, the knowledge transfer is priceless. Imagine what it means for a young Filipino sailor once navigating rusting patrol boats, now standing at the helm of one of the most advanced naval ships in the world. That's not just a career leap, that's generational inspiration. But here's the political side that nobody wants to say out loud. Accepting this ship also deepens the Philippines' role in America's Indo-Pacific strategy. And that means whether we like it or not, the country becomes part of a broader containment plan aimed at China. In the language of geopolitics, that's called alignment. In plain terms, it means when tensions rise, Manila can't just sit this one out. And you can already see it. The pressure is mounting. The more America embraces the Philippines as an ally, the more Beijing will push back. There will be more Chinese Coast Guard ships accidentally entering Filipino waters, more surveillance, more diplomatic protests dressed as polite statements. The Philippines is stepping into a chess match between superpowers, and every move from here on must be calculated to the last millimeter. Still, maybe this is exactly what the Philippines needs to be tested, to be forced to grow. Because let's be real, the world never truly respects a country that can't defend its borders. For decades, Filipinos abroad have earned respect through hard work, compassion, and skill. Now, maybe it's time for the country itself to earn it through strength. Drop strength in the comments if you agree that respect begins when a nation learns to protect its own people. Now, let's zoom out. What does this mean for the region? Experts from the Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative predict that this move could inspire other nations to pursue similar modernization paths. Indonesia is ramping up submarine production. Vietnam is upgrading its missile systems. Even Malaysia is reconsidering its naval procurement plans. The Philippines, once seen as lagging behind, might have just triggered a regional arms evolution. Not a race, but an awakening. And make no mistake, this isn't just about deterrence, it's about dignity. It's about a small nation saying we're done asking for permission to defend ourselves. But there's another layer to this story, one that's emotional, not tactical. For many Filipinos, this warship represents more than national defense. It's a symbol of redemption. The country that was once colonized, invaded, and used as a pawn in global wars now stands as a trusted partner in global peacekeeping. That's a narrative shift with enormous psychological power. It tells every Filipino, whether they're in Manila, Dubai, or Toronto, your homeland is not weak. It is waking up. Of course, with power comes expectation. The international community will be watching not just how the Philippines handles the ship, but how it handles its responsibility. Misuse it, and critics will call it reckless. Underuse it, and skeptics will call it symbolic. But balance it, and the Philippines becomes a case study in modern deterrence. In the halls of Washington, this move is already being hailed as a proof of trust. A U.S. State Department analyst said this transfer marks a transition from dependency to deterrence. And that right there, that's the story that needs to be told to every Filipino watching this right now. Because this isn't about being pro-America or anti-China, it's about being pro-Filipino, about realizing that strength doesn't come from who arms you, it comes from what you're willing to fight for. And let's face it, the Philippines has always been underestimated. But now, the same waters that once saw helplessness might soon witness resilience. The cruiser won't just patrol the sea, it'll patrol the national psyche. A reminder that even nations dismissed as small can shift the tides of power when given the right tools and the right timing. So where does this all lead? To a new chapter. A chapter where the Philippines isn't just reacting to global changes, it's part of them. Where Filipino sailors aren't just passengers in a great power game, they're players, with a seat at the table and a radar that sees the world coming. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real victory here. Not the warship, not the headlines, but the realization that the world is finally watching the Philippines, not for pity, but for partnership. So when you see that massive ship one day sailing under the Philippine flag, remember this, it's not just America's gift. It's a symbol of what happens when a nation decides to stop being the quiet corner of the Pacific and starts becoming its voice. Because in the end, power isn't just about the weapons you hold, it's about the courage to use them wisely.